because I'm just doing very basic motion analysis today, and also I know the slides are very ass, but yeah. Okay, motion analysis is what we're gonna be talking about today. Why? It's because of the fact that I feel like by now you guys already know arguments, you guys know weighing, you guys know this and that. All the wait, sorry, someone said a message. By the way, it's better if you guys. Oh, that's my shot. Never mind. I won't be able to see the chat, so if you guys have any questions when I'm presenting, feel free to open your mic. All right. So why the reason why I'm talking about motion analysis today is basically just because you need to know you need to really be able to identify your burdens within the motion to actually be able to, you know, come up with the correct arguments, come up with the correct direction, come up with the correct content, right? So this is a very important skill for your basic debating, right? So let's just go straight into it. So I'm going to do this just in the form of like basic motion types that you guys already know, but I'm going to expand on it a little more and then talk about like as give you some examples if I do have. Some of them I didn't write examples, but I'm sure I can come up with them since I do have motions in mind. But we're also just gonna go more into detail about how exactly the burdens are going to be identified for each motion. So for this house believes that it's basically just a value judgment motion. That's what we call it. So in this, we're just trying to figure out whether or not the motion is true or if it's false, right? So what this means then is that, for example, like this house believes that cats are better than dogs, right? So the statement here is that cats are better than dogs. So your point here is to prove for government that cats are indeed better than dogs, and then opposition, of course, is that dogs are indeed better than cats, right? So your burdens are basically related to the truth value of the statement. So your burdens are basically just to prove how true the statement is, or what the statement on your side, how true is that statement that you're going to be proving, and also vice versa, how false is the other side's statement, right? So I feel like this is pretty simple. It's the most basic motion. Let's just use an example here. This house believes that underdog narratives in culture and media are overvalued, right? So the burden of government under this is to prove that underdog narratives are overvalued, whereas the burden of opposition is to prove that underdog narratives are valued enough or possibly undervalued within culture and media, right? So then, now that we have this burden, once you've identified your burden, you move into your arguments. You ask yourself, how exactly are you supposed to prove this burden, right? This is why we bring up burden of proof. It's because you're telling the judge, I understand what is my goal, and then I am going to prove these goals within my case, right? Within my speeches. You're going to prove why underdog narratives are overvalued. So an argument, for example, to prove this burden of proof, to fulfill this burden of proof, is like that, for example, underdog stories often do not occur in real life. Basically, that they're very unrealistic. So therefore, when you put a lot of value for underdog narratives in media, like you glorify movies, for example, then you create unrealistic expectations within people about their opportunities in life, and then the impact here is that you lead to irrational decision making, right? So you see how this argument talks about how like we believe that underdog narratives are overvalued. What exactly does it mean to be overvalued? Is that you are placing unnecessary value on it that creates harm, right? And that's an extension of your burden of proof, to prove that it's causing harm, right? That is our burden here, to prove that underdog narratives are overvalued. What do we mean by the fact that it's overvalued? Is that it's causing harm to society, for example, or that it's being there's too much value being put onto it to the point that it is doing more harm than good lah, basically. And then your impact here, once you've explained your argument, then you can finally prove that your impact is true, right? You cannot just say that, oh, underdog stories lead to irrational decision making. You have to need to have the logical link between that and your impact. So by doing this, then you're able to prove your burden of proof lah, you know? Then, for example, on opposition, you prove that underdog values are indeed valued enough. So then you need to talk about what exactly like is the importance of being valued enough, you know? then why is this good that they're valued enough, right? Especially like just proving that they're valued enough, right? Because the motion is just saying like, oh, underdog narratives in culture and media are overvalued. So your job as opposition is to oppose this idea, say that they're not overvalued and in fact they are valued enough, right? So then you can just come up with an argument like underdog stories inspire like vulnerable stakeholders to continue like working hard and aiming high, so they are productive within their work, for example, to uplift themselves from these bad circumstances, even if the likelihood of achieving their true goal is low. So what do I mean by this is basically just like, they're going to be productive, they're going to work hard, so therefore overvalue, not overvaluing, value, putting a lot of value on underdog narratives is very important for these vulnerable stakeholders, and therefore, even if not everybody can like become like a star from like their bad circumstances, when they are being put in a bad circumstance where they're unlikely to actually become a star, at least they, because of the hard work, the time and effort they've put into their what they're doing, therefore they're probably going to be able to achieve at least some sort of a better life because of their hard work, right? Because of their productivity, because usually capitalism will, sorry, I keep on talking about capitalism, but capitalism usually rewards you for like productivity. Yeah. Now, you guys understand that? I feel like maybe I overcomplicated it a bit, but TLDR is just about proving whether or not a statement is true or whether or not a statement is false. No questions. Okay. Next. This house supports and this house opposes, right? Now this is very similar to this house believes that. It's just that instead of now we're just saying, like, you can just, for example, we can just say this house supports like the very high valuation of underdog narratives in culture and media, right? You can always it's often rephrased in that form. It's very similar, I would say. It's not really a hard leap from this house believes that to this house opposes or this house supports, right? So I think this is pretty easy. But you often see motions like this house supports the narrative or this house opposes the narrative. So what exactly is a narrative? Because you often see this within motions, right? And it's important to understand what a motion means when they say the narrative. So the narrative just basically means a concept or an idea or a belief within society, right? And it's not just you need to you yourself are supporting your idea. You're talking about this house. When you say this house supports the narrative of like hard work is necessary for success, that's a very bad motion. But this house supports the narrative that hard work is necessary for success. Not only are you trying to support the idea that hard work is necessary for success, but you're also trying to wait, this house supports the narrative that hard work is necessary for success. This house supports the narrative that hard work is necessary for success. Yeah, okay. So you also have to be supporting the idea that this narrative exists within society, right? So not only are you just trying to say like, yes, you also need to prove that this narrative is a good narrative, that it is good to believe the fact that hard work is necessary for success, but you're also trying to support the narrative that people believing in this narrative, right? Because of the fact that they're not just saying like this house believes that hard work is necessary for success. Because if they just wanted you to just prove that that is true, they would put it as a this house believes that motion. But rather, they're phrasing it as a this house supports the narrative that hard work is necessary for success. So what they want you to argue is not only just prove that hard work is necessary for success, but argue on why it is good for people to believe that hard work is necessary for success. Because realize that when they use the word the narrative, they're talking about this idea existing within our society. Like people actively believing in this idea in the status quo, right? Do you get the idea? That we're talking about why this narrative or idea is good to exist within society, of or if you're saying this house opposes the narrative, then you're just saying why this narrative shouldn't exist in society and why the narrative we're talking about is actually false, even if is actually false, right? So the burden here is more like two rather than just one for you, because you also have to carry the burden of proving that this idea should or should not exist within society, not just that if it's true or false. Because people interpret things differently, right? Because if it's just saying this house believes that hard work leads to success, I feel like that's an obvious government win. But then if it's like this house supports the narrative that hard work leads to success, you have a potential to argue about how people are going to overwork themselves, for example, and get burned out, for example, right? You get that idea? Anybody have any questions?
So wait, so if motions are different, we do the same, or like do we have to do the same or what?
What do you mean? Like the same burden?
Like prefers or regrets, do we have to do like something similar?
Oh, that's coming next. Like this, the
Oh,
third slide.
okay.
Yeah, I'll get to that later. Okay, so for this house wood, this I feel like I've talked about mechanization. So this mechanization, if you've heard that lecture that I did in the past, you guys should already understand exactly like what this house wood is about. But I'll just go through it again. This house wood is an actor motion. So basically, it is about deciding why a certain action is good or bad for the actor. Emphasis on the last three words, for the actor. When we're talking about this house wood, we need to determine why something, the thing that we are talking about, is within the actor's interest. And the actor is basically just the person making an action within the motion. Actor does not mean an actress or like I don't know, like Zendaya or something, or Tom Holland. It is like a debate term. It means the person making the decision, the person acting within the motion, right? So for example, this house would make Bahasa Sarawak a state language. So under this motion, government's burden is to prove that it is within the interest of Sarawak, i.e. the state government of Sarawak, to make Bahasa Sarawak a state language, right? Because obviously the only person able to make Bahasa Sarawak a state language is the Sarawakian government. So obviously the actor here is the Sarawakian government. But of course you cannot, it just doesn't mean that all of your arguments have to be about why making Bahasa Sarawak a state language is good for like the Sarawakian government directly. You can do indirect arguments. Of course, it's mostly indirect lah. The most relevant arguments under this motion for government are going to be indirect arguments. What do I mean by that? It's saying that it's not that you just can't say that it's good for Sarawakians because the Sarawakians like us are not part of the Sarawakian government. It's just that you need to link that what is good for Sarawakians, aka what's good for us, for example, is going to be good for the Sarawakian government too, i.e. the actor within this motion, the person that is making Bahasa Sarawak a state language. And by doing that, it's pretty easy to say that what is good for Sarawakians is good for the Sarawakian government, right? Because the Sarawakian government is meant to represent the interests of the Sarawakian people. Boom, that's how you prove it. Very easy link there. You've already proved how you cater to the actor's interest, right? And this also means that you need to mechanize what making Bahasa Sarawak a state language looks like. Because under this house would, unlike for this house believes that and this house supports or opposes, this house would is about the judge expects you to bring forth a mechanism, right? Under this house believes that and this house opposes, you're supposed to prove the likelihood that the government is going to be doing like things this way or that way, right? Like this house, like I can't think of a motion as example right now. But for this house would, you don't really need to prove the likelihood that the Sarawakian government is going to, like, I don't know, make Bahasa Sarawak mandatory in all schools, right? You can just say that and it will be true. the problem here is that you just need to prove how effective that will be, right? That's the point of a mechanism. Is that under this house believes that and this house opposes, you're not doing a mechanism, you're doing a counterfactual, but you need to prove that this counterfactual is likely to happen. It's likely to be the counterfactual that exists. Like, most likely you wouldn't see a motion like this house believes that this. No, actually you would. You would see that this house believes that the Sarawakian government should make Bahasa Sarawak a state language. But under this motion, because you're using this house believes that, then you would have to, you would have to prove that it is likely that the Sarawakian government is going to make it mandatory within all schools when, like, they are trying to make it a state language, right? Because, like, I don't know, like, as a state language, it should be taught in schools. Make some analysis behind that, right? Okay, but for this house would, your mechanism, the judge will immediately assume it to be true that if you say that the Sarawakian government is going to enforce Bahasa Sarawak in schools, that yes, that is going to happen. It's just then the judge has questions like, how are you going to make sure you have enough teachers for that? How are you going to make sure you have enough funding for that? How are you going to make sure it's going to be done properly, right? You can say it's going to happen, you just need to prove how effective it's going to be, how it's going to be done properly in the first place, right? And you need to provide mechanism because it needs to be clear what exactly making Bahasa Sarawak a state language is, because it's very unclear. Are you talking about it's going to be taught in schools? Are you thinking about, you're going to standardize how the language is being written and spoken? Or is it going to be used in official documents, etc., etc., right? And then afterwards, how are you going to achieve this mechanism? How exactly is this mechanism going to be successful? Like what I mentioned earlier, like, how are you going to make sure you have enough teachers? What funding are you going to be achieving this with, for example, right? Another form of a this house would motion is a this house as X would. Basically, X is just the actor, so it's just making it to you very clear who the actor is. So it's basically just this house as the Sarawakian government would make Bahasa Sarawak a state language. Same thing, is just that they mention the actor for you. So in this case, it's abundantly clear that you only can debate the motion from the interest and the perspective of the Sarawakian government. That applies for any other actor motion too. Yeah. Any questions before I move on to this house regrets and this house prefers?
Belen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Isn't this house doesn't this house would is just like government has the fiat to say like, oh, this will happen, but like not necessarily that it's like effective or whatnot. So like incentive wouldn't really be like that big of a deal there, like, right?
Yeah, no, that's what this house believes that.
Yeah. So this house would basically, both sides have the fiat to say that like their mechanism works, but this house as X would, you would have to show that it's in the interest, right? So yeah.
The fiat basically just means that the judge will assume that what you said is going to happen. That is, that when you say you make Bahasa Sarawak a state language, is that in the law, for example, part of the law of making Bahasa Sarawak a state language is that you mandate it in all schools. The judge will assume that will happen, but it is not under your fiat to say that this is going to happen successfully. You can say there are not enough teachers. You can say there's not enough funding. That's basically what this house would means. That's basically what the mechanism is. Yeah, that's what I said just now.
Yeah, so this house would make... Sorry, I think I just heard it wrong. So we're on the same page. This house would make Bahasa Sarawak a state language, means that it will be carried out no matter if you talk about the interests of Sarawak or not. Yeah. So it just will be carried out.
Yeah, just now I was mentioning, if we say like this house believes that the Sarawakian government should make Bahasa Sarawak a state language, then you need to
sorry, my bad. Okay.
Yeah, that's when I was talking about the incentives. Under that, you have to talk about the incentives of the Sarawakian government to not, because obviously you already have like to defend that the Sarawakian government will make Bahasa Sarawak a state language. Of course, like that's going to happen lah. But then it's up to you under that motion to prove that it's within the incentive of the Sarawakian government to do it a certain way. Like, of course, the motion says this house believes that the Sarawakian government should make Bahasa Sarawak blah 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 blah. Then yes, it's going to happen. But then it's up to you to prove that the Sarawakian government is going to do it a certain way. But if it's this house would, then you can just say whichever way you want to. It's just you need to prove how effective it is going to be.
Okay, yeah, we're both on the same page. Sorry, I just heard the wrong thing. Okay, continue.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Alright. So this house regrets. This is about what Ting asked earlier. So for this house regrets is a retrospective motion, right? So basically, it's about regretting the existence of something in our status quo. So what this means is that your burden is going your burden is going to be related to how harmful or beneficial something has been to the world. So something that has existed right now and does exist right now. When you say this house regrets, for example, the glorification of what was that motion we did the other day? This house regrets the glorification of what was the emotion? Huh?
Individuality.
Individuality. Thank you. This house regrets the glorification of individuality. When we say this house regrets, you need to not assume. You need to think of the motion in a way that the glorification of individuality has happened and is happening in our current world. Usually, this house regrets motions will usually be referring to like actual things that happen in our real world. So you're linked to the real world stuff, and having specialized knowledge about this that you read up is going to help you a lot in these motions. But sometimes it's also super vague that you probably have not read up about it before. Like glorification of individuality, I don't think that's something that people usually read up before a motion, before a competition lah. But your burden here is not to prove that the glorification of individuality is bad or good. Yes, that's part of your burden, but your burden is to prove that it has actively caused harm to our world right now, like our world, not just some fantasy world, like some no other debate motion that we're talking about, like our actual world, right? So the government burden isn't necessary to just is also going to be about like proving that said thing has done more harm over good, right? So to prove that you should regret it because of the fact that it's done more harm than good. But then that's your first part of your burden. Your second part of your burden is also to defend a counterfactual without the same thing. What do I mean by that? Is like, for example, this house regrets the glorification of individuality. Defend your burden. Part of your burden is to defend the counterfactual, which means a different world, like an alternate universe, without the glorification of individuality. And then you need to tell me what is most likely for this world to look like. And remember, you do not have a fiat under this motion. The only time you have fiat is for this house would. So for this motion, you just have to come out and just say, yeah, like, why is this specific counterfactual the most like why is this specific counterfactual that I'm telling you about the most likely counterfactual for a world, or a counterfactual without the glorification of individuality. I hope it's possible for you to absorb that. As for the opposition burden, then, your opposition burden is to prove that whatever thing we are talking about, that the government is trying to say that they regret, has done more good than bad for society. Or basically, you just do not have any reason to regret the same thing. So for opposition, they just have to talk about how like they think that the glorification of individuality has done a lot of good for our current society, right? And you can bring up real world examples. This motion, a retrospective motion, is the best time to bring up real world examples because we are actively talking about something that has existed in our real world and we're discussing its existence in the real world, right? And often you will see motions like this house regrets the narrative. Once again, when we bring up the narrative, we're not just talking about, oh, this house regrets the narrative that the glorification, this house regrets the narrative that hard work lah again. No, pain is necessary for success. No, suffering is necessary for success. I remember we did that some time ago. You're not just arguing about, oh, yeah, government needs to say that pain is not necessary for success, and opposition needs to prove that pain is necessary for success. That is not the case. That is not what your burdens are. Your burden is to prove that, for government, is to prove that this narrative that pain is necessary for success shouldn't exist at all. And there's an interesting way you can do this, though I wouldn't say it's the most strategic. It's just an interesting way to do it. I'm not encouraging you. It's just that it's possible. It's not illegal or bad or unallowed by the judge. It's that you can technically say that, for example, pain is necessary for success, but you regret this narrative that has existed within society, right? Uh, so I mean, feel like this will be a very unstrategic, but just talking about how everybody is going to misinterpret um what is it? Misinterpret the narrative that pain is necessary for success, and or suffering is necessary for success, and therefore everybody just puts themselves through unnecessary suffering, right? Of course, it's kind of hard to actually prove that, but it is possible because your burden here is not the proof that suffering is necessary for success. Is not Your burden here is not to prove that pain is not necessary for success. Your burden here is to prove that the narrative that pain is necessary for success is bad, right? Your burden is about the narrative, not about the idea itself, like proving or whether or not it's true or false. So you need to be able to understand the difference between a this house regrets the narrative versus a this house believes that or this house supports, and also like this house supports versus this house supports the narrative. They're very different things, right? And for this house prefers, I feel like it's kind of similar to this house regrets, except it's not retrospective, and often more than not, you do not see it coming up like this house prefers the narrative. I've never seen that before. It's usually just talking about words. They usually say this house prefers a world where blah 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 blah, and it's basically just comparing two worlds. Like government, they just have to defend the world that the motion states. This house prefers a world where like there's a lot of different like scenarios with this. It can be like anything. It can even be like a fantasy motion, like this house prefers a world where the Hunger Games existed, for example. Very very stupid motion, but I'm just being reminded of a Hunger Games motion I saw like years ago. And then what the opposition needs to do is provide a completely different counterfactual, a completely different world that either one, they defend the status quo, or two, if it's a very unique motion where they cannot defend the status quo, so like fantasy motions for example, you defend a counterfactual that you make up yourself, but you mention why this is the most likely counterfactual to be for you to defend, right? Be charitable with this. Don't like give yourself a very easy counterfactual to defend. Give yourself a very realistic counterfactual for you to defend that you think the judge would think is okay, right? So what is likely that the judge wants you to defend as the opposition? Just think about it in that way, right? And then for the government, it's pretty easy. Like, just do what the motion tells you. Okay. Does that explain like the this house regrets and this house prefers thing to you thing? And any other
Yeah.
questions from anybody else? Yeah, thing. So wait, sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I guess I understand it now.
Alright, okay. That's good. It's 9:09. I'm assuming